So, welcome to Mondays with Miss Reid. This is the first time I've had a feature conversation. I usually save these for Thursdays where I actually talk with other people. But tonight I have with me Kimberly and Brittany of KIMBRITIVE. How are you doing?
Hey, y'all. Hey.
And I'm just going to talk to them a little bit about what they do. So I met Kimberly at a conference where I was like dying to meet Emily Dela Cruz in person and spent 15 hours in my car driving from Baltimore to Philly. Don't know why it took that long that particular time. But I sat next to her and everybody was like, oh, I don't have a business, but this my friend. And then when it got to us, she was like, you know, I do have a business and we can be friends. And I was like, see, this is what I'm talking about. And to find out that she does have a business with a friend of hers was even better. So why don't you guys tell us a little bit about KIMBRITIVE and what you all do in general?
So, just for people to know, KIMBRITIVE actually combines both Brittany and I's name. So people always like, what is KIMBRITIVE? I don't get it. But my name is Kimberly. Her name is Brittany, and we're a collaborative. So there you go, right?
Collaborative, because I was thinking creative, but okay. I did get the KIMBRITIVE Brit. I got that.
We can roll with creative too. That works too. But KIMBRITIVE, I would say, has been a passion project of ours for a very long time that we've, I think more so in the more recent years, have shifted it to more of a business platform, so to speak. So Brittany and I have been doing this work since our college years. And when we graduated, we was like, you know, this is something that fuels us, gives us energy, something that we really care about. And we wanted to continue this work. So we sort of put our brains, our energies, our experiences together to design workshops. And as time went on, I think the universe in some ways pushed us into creating a business because, like I said, we were doing this out of passion, not thinking about the long term of it. I would say in some ways it was more so like, we love doing this, let's do it. And then here we are today on this webinar with you. So, yeah.
Okay. So I love y'all website. I just want to say that first of all, like, really enjoyed you guys' website and reviewing it, getting prepared for this. And the first question, because it's back to school season and it's also the inaugural Self-Care Awareness Month, I want to know a little bit about the lack of sex ed in schools that fueled the creation of this work that you all have been doing.
Yeah. So Kim and I started KIMBRITIVE really because there was not just like a deep-seated need for sex education in general, but like in our own lives. And so we saw gaps that weren't being filled in our own life. And even as adults, like I can't say that I sat for a formal sex education class for myself as a professional, like ever. So like 16 and 17-year-old Brittany and Kim constantly show up in how we create stuff. So like my story is, I'll let Kim tell her story. I went to private school my entire life. And so I went to Catholic school and Christian school. So I had a mixture of like Baptist pastors and Catholic nuns all throughout like my life. And sex education was nowhere near to be found. And it's like, I don't even think I had abstinence only education. I just had nothing, like zero, zilch, nothing. And it wasn't until I was like 17 that I like walked in, like there was a mobile testing unit on the corner of my block and they had Metro cards and I had plans for the weekend. And I was like, I'm going to go get this Metro card. And so I walked into this mobile testing unit and I was getting asked all these questions about like risk for HIV, being sexually active, like all these things. And I had no answers. All I knew was I wanted a Metro card. I had no answers. And I ended up getting tested that day for the first time and learning all of these things in a mobile testing unit for like 7 minutes from a stranger. And I left and I was pissed. I was like, you know, this is horrible. And at the same time, like in that time frame, Black women, the leading cause of death for Black women in the United States was HIV and AIDS, right? And so like this parallel between like knowing this risk and me being a Black woman and being sexually active as a young person, but not having any of this information, I was over it. And so I felt like there's something that I need to be able to do in order to change that course or that path for other young people. And that's still very much the scope of what it is today, like lack of funding in sex ed, states that are passing actual harsher rules for people to not teach about sex education or to teach abstinence only. there's no real guideline anywhere for what you have to teach. So you can actually say like sex kills you, and that's fine as an education measure. And so we are working really hard to like push back against that. And I think Kim, like I had private education, but Kim had public education, and it still like mirrors, you know, similarities.
Right. For me, I remember specifically there was a day that the Department of Health came to my high school to test everyone for gonorrhea and chlamydia. So of course, at the time I was sexually active, so I went to get tested, whatever, but I didn't really have the background or context about what I was doing, why they were even in our school, all these different things. So I had a pediatrician as a person that, you know, I felt most comfortable at the time talking to about like my body, things that I wouldn't talk to my mom about. So I remember asking her, I was like, you know, they had the Department of Health come to my school the other day and tested everyone for STDs. And like, what is this gonorrhea, chlamydia thing that they were talking about? And she was like, ugh, you don't got to worry about that. Only nasty girls get STDs. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. And at my 16-year-old brain, I was like, that makes sense. And as I continued to grow and get older and more mature and wiser, I just was like, wow, like that was the one opportunity where a quote responsible adult should have been able to educate me on something that I was curious about that could have impacted me. But instead, you know, there was obvious values and bias and judgment in her statement, but it didn't serve me. It didn't give me more information that I was requesting. So I think looking at both of our experiences, you see that there's one lack of education in our schooling experiences, and then the resources that we probably know to utilize, such as our medical providers, may not even be the safest place for us to ask questions. So it's lots of void all around, I would say.
And then I'm glad that you mentioned your parents. Like when I was going through you all's website and I was thinking about it, like, okay, she went to public school, she went to a private school, but what about at home? Like for me, my mom had me at 16, so I kind of felt like she overdid it. Like, and I won't say overdid it as far as sex ed goes, but she was open. She was open. I knew how I got here. I knew that I was the decision of two teenagers and their hormones getting the best of them. And, you know, it wasn't a situation where she was taken advantage of or anything like that. It was a choice. It was a choice. She didn't know for more than half the pregnancy because her metabolism was just so high. She didn't gain any weight. She was still getting her period as a consequence of her birth control and like antibiotics from strep throat. Like it was just so much that she wanted to share with me that these are the ways that birth control can fail you. Don't just get out here and start having sex and think that birth control is going to save your life, because that's not how it works. These things counteract birth control. Like she taught me a lot. She taught me a lot as far as her own personal experience, and then the research that her parents made her do as a consequence of her getting pregnant as a teen. She kept me in different programs, like Horizon Health had a teen program. I was there at 9, like, you know, because somebody we knew got pregnant at 10. And that person was taken advantage of, but she just was like, no, she need to know, and she need to know now. So I was fortunate enough that my mom shared her own personal experiences with me, and then was sure enough to put me in community resources. So what was sex like a taboo topic in your homes?
Yeah, for me, my parents, my father in particular, I would say, because that's a person I would say had tried to talk to me about sex and all these different things. But as a father, his perspective was, you know, negative. When I look back on it, it was more so like, you know, men just want one thing from you, or boys just want one thing from you. So I, in some ways, had that in my brain that that's really what guys want from me. They just want to have sex with me. That's it. They don't want to have a relationship with me, all these different things. And looking back on it, I understand where that perspective has come from. It's fair as a parent, making sure that your daughter is okay and safe and all these different things. But I don't think he had the language or the context to talk to me about everything else in relation to sex education or sexual health. He didn't have it. All he knew was there's potential danger out there, and I want to make sure that my daughter is safe. So, but I think now more so, my father and I, we talk about all the things. Like we talk about, you know, my sex health, all the things. Like my dad is a lot more comfortable talking to me about it, because I think he's like, you know, you got a good head on your shoulders. Like I trust you. Like I can talk to you about things that I don't feel squeamish. Like when I was 17, my father was so squeamish about talking to me about sex. Like when he found out that, you know, I was sexually active, he didn't talk to me for a month. the entire month, and we lived together. So, you know, that was his way of like dealing with things that he wasn't ready to do at the time. And it was hard for both of us, because I was like, well, why? I didn't do anything wrong. But for him, it was complicated type of.
You're his baby. He wasn't ready for you to not be a baby.
But I didn't change. I was still the same person before and after the act took place. So
for you were the same, but not as a dad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think for me, I think it was a little bit more complicated. Like, I wasn't raised by my biological parents. They died when I was very young. And so I was bounced around to like all these different houses, and I was in kinship care. And like my sexual health education or needs weren't top priorities for folks. It was like, is Brittany enrolled in school? Is Brittany suicidal? Is Brittany going to survive this thing? Is Brittany, you know, like, is she eating? And so I think that it kind of like fell to it wasn't a priority, right? Which is, I think, why I deeply advocate for schools to like try to pick that up, because we don't know where young people are and what's at home, because that was not on the list of, like, home wasn't even a real thing for a very long time for me. And then when I did finally like get to a place that was more stable, I ended up living with my aunt, who I affectionately call my mom now. And we had a 50-year age difference. And so, and my mom is very, she loves Bodak Yellow. She's very like, you know, here, but sex looks different. When she was young, she was also a teenage parent, and she was parenting before abortion was legal. You know, there was like birth control was, you know, just being able to be given to people that weren't married couples. And so like her experience of navigating sexual and reproductive health and healthcare is like completely different than what I know. And so we never really, she would just be like, you know, don't get pregnant and go to the doctor, but like never filled in the gaps. And I couldn't do anything with that information. But she was open to, I would say, like, she was sex positive in a way that I didn't understand until I was an adult. So like, I never had like really strict boundaries on like who my friends could be. In high school, all my friends were boys. And I often joke like I was a character on Disney Channel, because my friends that were boys used to spend the night at my house. And like, like my best friend, like he would literally spend the night at my house. We'd go to school together. And we weren't sexually active, but like we shared a bed for a lot of, you know, time in high school. And there was never like an open door policy. Like I lived on a different floor than where my mom stayed. And so it was pretty up to me, like when or who was coming to visit me. And I later found out when I was in college, like she saw two young people having sex on a train in between train cars. Mm-hmm. And she never wanted that from me. Like she never wanted me to just be out there having sex in a public place and not feeling safe or warm or whatever. And so I think her idea was like, you know, if you're going to have sex or if you're going to entertain people, do it in your house. At least you have control over the environment. But she never said that. Like she would never say like, you can have sex here. Like, even though they do that in the Netherlands and it turns out to be very healthy. She never said that. But it definitely was when I did start to call the shots about my sexual health and my sexual life, it definitely helped create a safer barrier for me. Yeah.
I think that's powerful, because I think sometimes, like you said, you didn't realize it at the time that you had such a liberal household, but when it boiled down to it, she was able to give you that type of freedom from a healthy place, from her mind. Like, you know, she never wanted to see you out here in the streets doing it in a way that was disobedient. And I think, you know, I can agree with that, as far as, even though as an adult now, I feel like maybe my mom shared too much. I always knew that she was sharing with me because she wanted me to be safe. She wanted to give me the tools I needed to make wise decisions and not be in the dark and not be out here asking. And that was something she said whenever I had friends over and they had questions, they were comfortable asking my mom, because she said, I'd rather you ask me, an adult who's lived through this, who could tell you right from wrong the way I lived through it and the things that I've learned and my friends' experience, than for you guys to get out here and get hurt. So, you know, that's just really interesting to me, that sometimes we don't even realize people are operating in our best interest in ways we never even imagined until the future. And I think just listening to you, that maybe that fuels why you do what you do, because of their experiences that have now impacted you. I initially approached you to do this collaboration on RAIN Day, which stands for Rape, Assault, Incest National Network Day, which is September 21st. Have you ever had any survivors of sexual trauma in your workshops? And as believers that youth are experts on their own lives, what advice would you give to parents, guardians, or educators on being authentic adult allies to survivors of sexual assault?
Yeah. So we don't explicitly, like, there's no mechanism to explicitly ask folks if they are a victim or survivor of any sexual assault or violence. But we've definitely had cases inside of workshops where things have been mentioned, whether it be intimate partner violence or something that seems like there's like a scenario about like birth control negotiation or something like that, that seems like they have a personal and deep experience with that issue. Definitely how young people respond, you could tell that it's personal to them. And so like if they're in their bag about something, it's because it's currently happening to them at that moment. But we don't explicitly ask those questions just because we're in a group. Unlike individual settings, we're in a group setting. And so we don't want, if a young person comes out and says like, you know, I've experienced this, then Kim and I facilitate in a way that is trauma-informed and in line with social work practice on how to deal with that in the moment. But we don't explicitly ask those questions because they are in a group setting. Mm-hmm. But for parents and guardians, we're very much along the spectrum of adult allyship and adult accomplices, and like having a trusted, honest, like going to listen no matter what adult is perhaps the most important thing you can be. And that doesn't have to just be a parent or a caregiver. It can be a teacher. It can be like school personnel. It can be any one person that feels like they can hold and sit and hold space for that person, that young person that's going through whatever it is that they're going through. I think that like it's important above all things, and like what we know in the media and what we know in popular culture is that sometimes the world is really forgiving of those people who commit sexual violence crimes, especially Black men. And I have to say that because like people will cape for someone that is their favorite artist or, you know, like whatever. And even if there is like evidence, like long evidence of like things that have happened. And I think when it comes to Black girls, which represents a huge demographic of the young people we work with, research from Black Women's Blueprint say that like 60% of Black girls have experienced sexual assault or sexual violence in her lifetime, and it can't be ignored. Like when you know a number like 60%, you can't ignore that. Right. And so if you like I think we lead with, you know, whatever the workshop is, we lead with that understanding that this is more than likely an experience with someone in the room, and it is like we're obliged to act in the ways that make sense, but that's also like not in the ways of like calling a police officer, knowing that if you belong to a Black or brown community, police doesn't also necessarily, like this is not SVU, right? Olivia is not gonna pop up on the scene and be like, oh yes, let's protect this child. That's not how that works. And so really taking the measures to understand what the best community response could be in that moment.
Okay. That's a lot. I think it's definitely important to know the facts and know the stats on that, because I'll say as far as, you know, caping for your favorite celebrity, I found myself in that spot as a freshman in college. Not really until I started having those experiences happen to people close to me, that I realized like, okay, you know, it's not a thing that just happens like that. And it's sad that it took for that, but I remember having a mentor. I'm a part of a mentoring organization that started at Howard University, where I'm a graduate of. And this person that was in that organization as well, I really looked up to. They worked, there's a group on campus called Industry Power Players, where they get to work very closely in the music and entertainment industry. And she had like access to the hospital photos and a connection with their agents and stuff like that, and was like, it's real. And I just remember feeling so small because I don't ever feel like I explicitly caped for, you know, that individual, but it was something that was hard for me to accept that they did that. And I didn't want to be on the let's bash this person train without the facts. Like, okay, something happened between the two of them. That's between the two of them and the law to work out. It's not really my business. And then when you start seeing that it's happening to people around you, like, then you want it to be your business. You want people to care and you want people to get involved. And to this day, I think if people didn't start having opinions, they might still be together. And whether that is a positive or a negative thing, we'll never know. But I do think knowing and understanding the facts around it, the same thing happened when I was a teacher and the whole Ray Rice situation happened. And I had to watch sixth graders respond to that and watch them take sides. And I was like, dang, is this what I looked like as a freshman in college? And like, you know, how can we change that? So I really admire the work that you all do in driving those crucial conversations. And, you know, I'm glad that you have the stats and are able to steer that conversation in a healthier direction. And speaking of that, how have you been able to forge these relationships with the school districts all over the country? Because you are tapping on taboo subjects as far as sexual education in itself, the repercussions and the things that come along with being a sexually active individual. Do you feel like the attitudes around sex education are progressing in schools since we were in high school?
I think there's an increasing charge, so to speak, for sex education for young people, just considering our political climate. And there's legit factual evidence out that suggests that abstinence-only education doesn't serve young people. So I think that people that care for young people are really trying to change what they experience. So I think in our inception and our work that we've been doing, we've been able to forge relationships because people are recognizing that I'm working with teenagers or young adults who are experiencing these different things, and I don't have the resources to help them. Like, where do I go to talk to have a workshop about sex ed that's not through, I don't know, an agency that might have stigmatizing messages. And I think in our own individual experiences as sex educators prior to building our own business, we realized that we were in some ways doing some of those harmful practices because that's what in some ways funding was suggesting for us to do. And what I mean by that is the idea that, you know, presenting statistics that or presenting images that show really the devastating effects of having an STD untreated. And that's not the way that you want to talk to young people about STDs, because that's not always how it pans out. That's not everyone's experience. But that's just the way that sex education has been framed in our country, very risk perspective, not necessarily the entire picture. So I think with our individual experiences as educators and coming together, we realize we don't want to replicate what's been done before that isn't serving young people at all. So we honestly just called places, reached out to organizations, and people reach out to us because word of mouth for what we've been doing. So I wouldn't say it's been a challenge, so to speak, to forge relationships with programs and organizations. It's been a matter of producing what we really feel is important and people liking that, and us building those partnerships from there.
Okay. Did you have anything you wanted to add as far as that's concerned, Brittany?
No, I think that Kim covered it. I think, you know, the large majority, when surveyed, the large majority of American parents want their kids to have sex ed. It's a small, quiet, the small, loud fraction of the country that is saying, like, no, we don't want this. Even people that seem maybe like conservative, like on the outside, secretly want someone else to teach their kid about the thing they don't want to talk to. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's something that people aren't willing to sit with. And usually, unfortunately, it's the decision makers are a part of that small faction. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily like the people that they represent. And so, I mean, that's what we're up against. We're up against this small group that has really loud voices, but knowing that the communities that we serve and want to serve actually do want these things.
Yeah. When I was listening to you talk about that whole risk approach, I thought about one of the movies I had been exposed to called 1 Week. And mm-hmm. 1 week, you seen it? Okay, so 1 week, for those who are listening who haven't seen it, pretty much follows this group of friends. It's a couple of guys throughout 1 week. They get HIV tested. One guy's in a committed relationship. The other guy is, out here living the life. And one of them contracts HIV. So, it's really interesting that was something that I was shown at an early age. And I think about how we could reapproach documentaries and films like that in a way that would be meaningful and actually reach young people without necessarily scaring them. Because I have a friend who was a biology major, and I just text her all my questions. I'd be like, okay, so this happened. All right, my body's acting weird, and that might not be the safest practice, but that's just what I'm comfortable with at this time. Mm-hmm. And then I think about it like, wow, I had all this exposure to certain stuff, but it's still something that's not necessarily comfortable for me. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that particular film is about HIV/AIDS, and I know you all are out here educating people on the pandemic. Do you ever partner with any mental health organizations to help them deal with the emotional changes that accompany a positive diagnosis?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really interesting, like the stages of like what education can look like. And so we're like the primary prevention, right? So it's like we do this education before a young person goes to get tested. And so some of our like walkthrough could be about like what testing is like, what will happen. And both Kim and I have done like some form of HIV testing or HIV education through like Department of Health and what they go through. But as like we're both trained in social work, and so like we're serious about being trauma informed or just informed about how we lead subjects. And for HIV, we haven't partnered with a mental health organization yet, and I would say yet because who knows if that's on the horizon. But we definitely attempt to approach these conversations in ways that young people feel comfortable about knowing it. And I think the bigger part is not around like what young people like what will do after they receive a positive diagnosis, but really trying to destigmatize like having a positive diagnosis. And so something that comes with like scare tactics and the ways that people are taught about HIV is it assumes that no one in your class that you go to talk about prevention is HIV positive. Like most people, when they walk and they do sex education, they have this assumption that everyone that you're talking to is HIV negative or chlamydia negative or gonorrhea negative, and that you're like preparing them to like avoid these things. But if a person is sitting in your room and has had an STD or is HIV positive, it really matters how you talk about those things, because that is where you can like trigger someone as an educator. If you're like, HIV is the worst thing ever, please avoid it at all costs or your life ends. And you have a person who is living a beautiful, bountiful, HIV positive life, you've already, you're redoing the harm and the hurt. And so I think that we focus heavily on attempting to really destigmatize how we approach sexuality and health education, knowing that we're a part of this world and community with folks that are positive and have a positive status and are living great lives. And it is our job to advocate for that life to be better. And that means access to medication, destigmatizing all types of like how you walk through the world, from medical services to education to schools to, all of those things. And the mental health component is huge for folks that are experiencing HIV and AIDS at whatever stage. But I think from our point as where we are in the education world, it's really like focusing on stigma as opposed to like what happens if you get a positive diagnosis.
Okay, that's fair enough.
But we are equipped to help that person be connected to resources in that.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's more so what I was wondering, because I know that you all don't represent yourselves or present yourselves as if you do both the informative piece and the counseling piece, but just wanting to make sure that you all are connected with the resources. Because I think a lot of times, I used to work for a mental health agency, and you'll be amazed at how under-resourced a resource is. So I just wanted to ask and get that out there. I want to talk a little bit more about reproductive justice, because, like I said, I'm the product of a teen pregnancy, and I'm thankful that my mom chose to carry her pregnancy to term. But I recently encountered a woman who wanted to terminate her pregnancy and couldn't afford the procedure on her own, and her partner refused to assist. As a part of your fight for reproductive justice, which is a new term that I learned on you guys' glossary at your page, what kinds of questions do you get on termination of pregnancy?
Yeah. So in some of the reproductive justice like workshops or classes that we do, a lot of just like, first of all, questions about like what termination, but like abortion is. I think that in media, when you Google, and if you Google abortion, you get all types of disastrous stuff. There are some folks that have done a really good job at showing late term abortions, or showing like really just grotesque things that are not real representations of what the medical procedure is. There's actually no government website. So like the Department of Health, the CDC, OMH, any of those places, they don't actually record or provide any information about what abortion is. And so it's not going to be the most reliable sources for a lot of our information. That's not what's going to populate because they don't have it. And so a lot of it is just like curiosity, like, what is it? Does it hurt? What happens? Will you die? And then like fact checking, like, abortions don't cause breast cancer. And doing away with like, who gets abortions? Abortion is common. 1 in 3 women, cisgender women, have an abortion in her lifetime before the age of 45. People who are religiously affiliated have abortions at the same rate that people that are not religiously affiliated. Catholics, like the biggest group that is known to talk about abortions, actually have abortions at the same rate that people that don't identify as Catholic do. So a lot of the things that we may hear from a big crowd about abortion is actually, not all that true. And so that's like the first step of like, normalizing what is a medical procedure, and talking about it in that way so that we don't create barriers for people who want to seek an abortion. Okay. So for people who want to seek an abortion, the second is really talking about the barriers that exist when it comes to abortion. So like you talked about, you recently encountered a woman. That's like such a real thing. So the Hyde Amendment, and a lot of people don't know. A lot of people know about Roe, like Roe v. Wade, which made abortion legal in the United States. But a few years after Roe was passed, the Hyde Amendment was passed, which basically stated that you couldn't use any federal funding to support abortion. So when people are up in arms about like where their tax dollars are going, no tax dollars, no federal money goes to abortion. And so that means that if you're on Medicaid, 6.2 million women are on Medicaid. If you're on Medicaid, if you're a Medicaid recipient, you can't receive an abortion, at least from federal funds. If you're in the military, no. If you're in Peace Corps, VISTA, AmeriCorps, any of those programs, work for the government, any type of termination is not covered. And so that means that a lot of people have to rely on other sources, their own money. People have cashed out life insurance policies, taken loans, had fish fries, all types of ways to try to, fund that. And then there's a great group of people that are working to actively raise money, the National Network of Abortion Funds. And there's abortion funds across the country that support people that can't pay for, a termination. And in New York, well, we're lucky that, Medicaid covers abortion in New York State. And so that's where we are. And so anyone that is pregnant is eligible for Medicaid in New York, and abortion is covered under Medicaid in New York. And so we don't navigate some of the same kind of barriers that other people do, but it's real. And the longer you delay, so let's say you're waiting and saving, the longer you delay, the more it costs. And the closer you get to it not being able to, you actually have the process to go. And so part of the time is like spent explaining the difficulties, especially if you're a young person, where you have to present identification, where you may have to stay at a hotel overnight, where you have to have multiple doctor visits, where you're coming into crisis pregnancy centers, which are located usually across the street from an abortion center, which will delay you getting any type of procedure because they're not a real medical service. They're actually fake. They take your temperature. They say come back in 2 weeks. They write you up fake doctor's notes until you're no longer eligible to get any type of procedure done. And so really helping young folks navigate, like, you know, this is what is, and, you know, giving you all the information to be able to make the best decision for your life. Because I don't think that you can do that if you don't know all that is. And I would say it's not even young people. Like my friends, I'm constantly like, actually, no, that's not true. And not from a sense of like trying to push like, you know, views or, you know, ideas about it. But if we start to talk about termination as a medical procedure and like what needs to happen and that it actually saves lives in some cases, is important. I think that's what we spend a lot of time doing when it comes up.
Wow. I learned so much from just that one.
I learned
and like I said, it's not something that directly affects me, but when I was talking to this person, I was like, damn, that's messed up. Like, you know, that and that's me not knowing everything that you just added on top of that, not even considering the medical aspect of what it was going to put her body through. Just the simple fact that I can't afford to do to my body what I want done, and the person who's put me in a position that I need this is not willing to help me.
Yeah.
They want me to have this baby. I'm telling them that I can't afford the procedure to not have this baby, which probably means I can't afford to take care of this baby once they get here, and you don't want to help me. And I'm not even processing, you know, what that must be like to even have the forethought to say, I don't want this baby, I want this procedure. The cost of the procedure, the insurance associated with it, the care that's going to be needed following that procedure. Like, you know, you just laid so much on me. I kind of need to process that.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. And I mean, I think I need people to stop thinking that you like walk into like a candy store and receive an abortion. And like, it's nothing like that. I mean, there's a whole host of like resources. There's like, you know, there's all options, which is a phone line that you can call to talk through all your options, which is super important. And there's all these things that people had to put together, like with no government funding, in order to support folks that like are, you know, attempting to make these decisions. And yeah, it's a medical procedure, but we don't treat it like that. There's physicians aren't trained in it. Like, it's not a part. I thought it was a part of medical school curriculum. It's not. So you can deliver a baby, but you don't have the skills. In many hospitals, they don't, you know, even if it's like an emergency, they don't have the ability to terminate a pregnancy because they don't have anyone that can perform an abortion.
I mean, but that is consistent with the fact that in medical school, you don't even really have that much content and curricula based on sexual health.
Yeah, it's like 3 days.
Yeah, 3 days throughout your 4 years of medical school.
What?
Yeah. So again, like thinking about like what we talked about earlier, if most people in some ways may feel comfortable, or I can identify their doctor as a person that you feel comfortable in some ways talking to about sexual health, and knowing that they may not even be informed enough to have that conversation, it's so many loopholes in people's experiences. So lots of work to be done.
Wow. We're having an awesome conversation. I feel like we have passed that 40-minute mark that I shared with you all. If you're willing to keep talking, I do have more questions to ask. I'm learning a lot. So it's just up to you all at this time.
I'm good.
Yeah, I think I'm good too.
Okay. Wow. Like, I have some friends that are on it that have pursued medical backgrounds, and it's like, I'm wondering, like, dang, did y'all know that? That is only 6 days out of the 4 years. Wow. Okay. My next question was more so as far as the terminology associated with servicing the LGBTQIA/NGC community. I didn't even know about the non-gender conforming piece until I visited your website. So I definitely, like I said, I really enjoyed viewing your website. It's comprehensive. It's colorful. I love that. And then I love that you guys give a glossary, because you're servicing a community that several communities that are ever evolving. And I like the fact that you are taking the steps to just inform your visitors before they even get to really know you all or work with you all and receive those services. But do you guys find it difficult keeping up with the terminology as far as servicing that particular community, that subset, when you do sex education?
I know this might sound really like blunt, but no. I think in our role as sex educators and the role that we have as sex educators, we are committed to making sure that we know these things so that when we get in front of an audience, we're not leaving anyone out, because that's something that already exists and we don't want to replicate that. So I think in our both individual experiences and our professional development through our organization, we try our best to be abreast on changing language, because society changes, but we want to keep up with that to make sure people that we work with feel affirmed, feel welcome in spaces that we create.
Okay. We talked a little bit about healthcare just now with that wonderful lesson on abortion.
Okay.
Is that something that you all share with your audience when you have these sex education workshops? Do you guys ever talk about healthcare? Do you let them know, like, hey, I know you be talking to your doctor, but they might not really know everything they need to know? And more so, like, I wasn't even thinking about it as far as terms of abortion when I wrote that question. I was more so thinking about, like, I'm 26. So last December, I fell off my stepfather's insurance, and I had my doctor's appointment in January, and I tried my hardest to get them to move it, and it just didn't work out. But I think about that, like people who are not working, who I used to teach, so I had health care. In my last job, I had health care, but I was working ridiculous hours and never had the opportunity to utilize that health care. So, like, do you all ever talk about really utilizing healthcare to its best advantage with the young people you work with, and just letting them know about those loopholes and ways they can get all the full services they need?
Yeah, I think, well, one, you reminded me that I have one whole month before I have to figure out my insurance situation because I turned 26 next month, my God. But two, in every workshop that we do, we always provide resources. So whether we're talking to someone, an audience, about testing or where to access certain things, we always provide those things so they know where to go. At least if they can't get it physically from us, they know where to go to get it. So we do insert that in our workshops, not necessarily the nitty gritty about, statistics and all these different things, but we do provide an avenue for them to access it. So should they need to do so.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, there are some like hiccups that you should announce for young people. So for example, like patient confidentiality is like the one, the one question that we always get, or will my mother find out about XY, procedure, test, whatever. And it's hard because it's like a yes or no answer, right? So we have HIPAA, which protects all patients and protects all information. Minors have rights, and they're different from state to state. There's a great website called Sex Etc. and you can find out what minors' rights are in every single state and every single place. And so while doctors in most places are regarded, they can't tell your parents anything, insurance companies are not under the same guise. So an explanation of benefits. Every time you go to the doctor or you visit, you visit your healthcare provider, even if you're 26, your parent, if you're under your daddy's insurance or mommy's insurance, they get a nice explanation of what you went to go get done, right? So it may say you got a TB test, 3 packs of NuvaRing, whatever it is. They tell you the whole cocktail menu plan that you got. And so there are a few folks on the ground that are fighting for, insurance companies to be a little bit, to treat explanation of benefits differently, because we know that, kids want to seek healthcare, but it's a barrier if you're scared that your insurance company is going to be like, yeah, and by the way, you've been tested for chlamydia and gonorrhea, and then you're going to be like, I don't know nobody named gonorrhea. And so you don't have to, I feel like we have to say those kind of things. We got to be like, yeah, and this is the one little caveat that may happen, but there's also other options. There's some states where kids have their own plan. You can get separate sexual and reproductive health services on a separate plan that's separate from your parents.
Wow.
And even thinking about your doctor's appointment, some young people may feel like, if my mom wants to be in my appointment where the doctor's going to ask me about my sexual history, some people may not realize that your parent doesn't have to be in the room. So you can talk to your doctor, and your doctor could be the sounding board to say, I want to have this conversation with her by herself. And, that may allow the mother to exit the room if you don't feel comfortable saying, Ma, I don't want you in here. So we make that point clear too.
Or assumptions about like, and this is adult people got this, that when you go get your yearly annual checkup, that you're being tested, you get a full panel of all the things. The doctor has to ask you whether or not you want to be tested for HIV, right? Like, or there, like in some places it's a question, or other STD panels. Like, it's not an automatic thing. And so people assume like, oh, I got a clean bill of health. I'm like, do you have all these things where all these things run? Because it's not an automatic like thing that happens. And so also making sure to tell young people, like, you know, you have to ask for this exam, or you have to ask for this test, because it's not automatic. Like, you just don't get it. It's not like you just receive it.
Yeah. For example, being tested for herpes, that's a request that you have to do. You may think that you're going to the doctor and getting a full panel, for example, but that may not be a part of what's happening for you during that day, during that appointment. So it's important, like she said, to make sure you're asking for what you want, because it may not be provided.
Yeah. Like Chipotle, ask for the guac.
Now I'm hungry.
Wow. I'll keep that in mind. Ask for the guac. So just listening to you all, I know, Brittany, you were sharing earlier that your mom was a teen parent as well. And one of my questions I wanted to ask is, like, witnessing your parents' relationships, did that influence your relationship as far as healthy sexual relationships and things? Because I know some people, you know, okay, I have a friend who's a survivor of domestic violence, and they have a child with their abuser. And all I can think about is, like, you know, this child is going to grow up thinking that someone's supposed to hit them in a relationship. So I just think about, like, you know, my experience as far as dating, and how watching the adults in my life influence what I expect from a dating relationship and things. Do you feel like what you witnessed in the home has set that expectation as far as your sexual health?
I think for me, and Brittany, probably you can chime in for your piece after, if that's okay. I think for me, I was witnessing my parents' relationship, and that kind of gave me a foundation for, I think, what communication and what compromise and all these things look like. So, I had a model for how to talk to someone that you care about things that you want and need. All the other stuff, not so much, because again, I think looking at my parents, I don't think they even had the language, the education, the background to, you know, give me those other nuggets that I probably needed at several points of my life to make better decisions. So,
yeah, I think I had too many models. Like, I think I just saw too many relationships. So I really couldn't, like, I didn't really know, like, what was healthy or what was unhealthy, or, like, I don't think I was able to draw, like, clear, like, oh, this looks like a really good relationship, this looks like really bad. So I think I spent a lot of time just, like, attempting to figure it out. And I just relied, like, I actually relied on my peers' relationships. So I'm like, oh, so your relationship was like that, so that's what it's supposed to be like. Or, like, an older cousin that was, like, right above me, and I was like, oh, she dressed like this, I want to dress like her, I want to have a relationship like her, I want all these things. But it wasn't necessarily, like, in my house. Like, I just had too many things in my house happening, and so I couldn't, like, pinpoint one relationship that I'm like, oh, yes, that's a loving relationship that I want to model. I just spent a lot of time experimenting, figuring it out. Still always figuring it out. Learn something new every day about myself inside of relationships.
No, I think that's the truest statement to date, because I think for my own personal experience, not until you just said that I ever feel like I saw too many relationships, but I do kind of have a habit of getting stuck. Like, certain people who were together when I was a certain age, if they break up, or some of them have broken up, like, my brain is still like, okay, so when y'all getting back together? It's been apart longer than my time experiencing them together. But, like, in my head, it's like, I want y'all to get back together, because that's what I remember as being healthy and happy, and, like, life has been wrong since y'all broke up. So when are y'all getting back together?
but see, I think now that you said that too, for me, I think in some ways watching my parents who've been married for 30 plus years, in some ways, I feel like I adopted this mentality that, you know, you fight for love, you stick it through all these different things. And I think that from seeing my parents being together for so long, I, in some ways, stayed in situations that weren't healthy because I'm like, you're supposed to fight for love. You go through things. Like, nothing is peaches and cream. But I wasn't putting myself into healthy situations because, now I think about it, I didn't really have context to say, this is not what I want. This is not okay. This is not working for me, regardless. And you're not taking care of me in this relationship. So why am I still here? So I think once I finally like realized that, you know, love can end in a period and we move on to the next sentence. That's when I was able to make healthy decisions for myself. I think before that, I was just like, oh, everybody has issues in relationships. You know, you go through things, blah, 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 and you fight through it. You don't end it, because who does that, right?
You know, that's so interesting that you say that, for two reasons. My mom and my grandmother were both here like 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And my mom made a statement to my grandmother. My grandmother asked me about a guy I used to date that came for Thanksgiving one year. And that's like something I never do. I never take people home. So she just wanted to know, like, are you guys still friends? And my mom was like, you get so bent out of shape when people are not together anymore. And, you know, but when you don't want to deal with anything anymore, you want us to just all forget about it. You want us to get over it fast, but you don't want to let go of things. And I'm like, you know, I never noticed that about myself. I'm kind of the opposite. Like, even though I kind of want other people to work it out, in my head, if you're not treating me right, I don't really have a problem with bye. I don't have a problem with walking away. And then I was telling someone a story a couple nights ago about that same individual and how I kind of knew it was over before Thanksgiving. And they were like, so why did you stay? And just like you, it was one of those situations where it's like, you know, at the time I was like 22. I really didn't have a lot of dating experience. And I just felt like, you know, they weren't mistreating me. It just wasn't a fulfilling situation. And I felt like, well, we could fix this because there's nothing technically wrong. It just wasn't, you know, anything where we were doing well either. So that's interesting that you say that. I think a lot of us are facing it. Like, I saw a tweet the other day where somebody said, how come this generation is not, marriage is suffering? And the person responded, because women in our generation leave when we are emotionally, physically, or, you know, when we're abused, we're not staying for that foolishness. But I think a lot of us are staying a lot longer, and we're just learning that we don't have to continue to do that. Like, we do that a little bit and then we figure it out. We're not staying in no 57-year-long marriages doing it, but we do kind of stay and feel like, oh, okay, well, you know, let's work it out. People who love each other work it out. So that's just interesting.
Yeah.
So I saw some images on your website where you guys use tools in your workshops. Where did you find these tools and how do you utilize them?
Are you talking about the vulva? Okay, so they're demonstration models. I like left them at work today, but they're demonstration models, and they come in all different types of things. I think what's on our website, you may see Kim holding like a vulva. Her name is Darla, and she is a brown vulva model, and we use these things to demonstrate mostly like how to put on condoms. And so like Darla is used to demonstrate how to put on an internal condom, and then there's another, Mr. Woody, which is like a wood penis model, and is used to demonstrate on how to put on an external condom, or sometimes called a male condom. But we call it an external condom because you don't have to put it on a male. You can put it on whatever. It still serves the same purpose. Internal condom, same thing. You can put it inside things. It doesn't have to necessarily go inside of a female person. And so it's a really good, I think it's good to see how these things are used. I know some people use like bananas. I don't know too many people having sex with bananas, but that could be a thing. I'm also not going to shade nobody. But I think that it gives a more realistic like feel for like folks that want to, you know, see. And what we found is that a lot of people have never put on a condom, especially like women, right? Have never actually did that process themselves. And so we have a lot of fun, you know, making games out of it and getting people to actually step out of their comfort zone.
You know, that's interesting because one of the things my mom shared with me that she probably shouldn't have was one of her experiences having to teach a man how to put a condom on. And I was like, what?
Your
And
mom
like,
is lit.
right. And, you know, like I said, I probably should have a conversation with my mom about boundaries, but, you know,
age appropriateness.
chose to share with me because she felt like it was important. She didn't want me to ever be in a situation where I was going to be intimate with somebody who did not know how to properly protect themselves. She had to tell this gentleman, that's on wrong. Let's try again. I was like, dang, you still slept with him? Like, that had to be embarrassing. I don't know. I don't know if I could be that man. But just listening to you, as far as like the inside condom, I remember reading something like a couple days ago, not far away at all, and thinking to myself, like, I remember going to the womanhood workshop when I was in Upward Bound, but I couldn't tell you how to utilize an inside condom or even where to buy one. So, like, what is that like? Do people ask you when you do these demonstrations, where can I buy one? What would this be used for?
Yeah. And most of the time we have them to give to people. I think what pains me a lot is when people are like, give everybody the tools, but don't bring the condoms. So I'm gonna show you all of this, and then and like condoms. I mean, Kim and I are very serious about providing like good condoms, and so like we are Trojan condom carriers. And the condoms are expensive, especially good condoms. They cost a lot of money. And so we demonstrate them. People ask, like, you know, the internal condom is of, like, you know, people aren't using them at the rate that they wanted them to be used, but they also came out years, like, you know, 30 or 40 years after the external condom came out. And so it's hard to get people, you know, on board, but
Right.
there's some studies that say that it's actually more pleasurable. And so it's also really cool to demonstrate. I feel like with Darla, you can see like how it works.
Right.
And you demonstrate like the pleasure aspects, like talking about the entire system. Like people talk about the vagina, but you have to talk about the clitoris and like all the other parts. And you can demonstrate that on Darla and how it's gonna work. So yeah, people definitely have all the questions, and people do. I have had young people go home and try it, walk around their house with it, because you can put it in like, you know, 12 hours before. So yeah, they just you can always be prepared with the internal condom.
Yep.
Always.
Okay.
She's like, my mind is blown. I learned all the things.
And, I learned so much. So just along those same lines, do young people have to get like permission slips to participate in the workshops you guys host?
Depending on who we're partnering with, that might have to be something that the parents opt in or opt out from. But regardless, we still make our intentions clear. I remember one time we got a request to do a workshop about sex education, but they said we couldn't bring any condoms. We couldn't really talk about sex for real. We just had to talk about like all the bad stuff that happened. And we were like, okay, thank you for thinking about us for your workshop. However, it's not us. I'm lying to you if I'm telling you I'm gonna go up there and do that, because I'm just gonna flip the entire script. Like, I can't do that. So yeah.
When I saw Darla on your website, I'm like, I don't think I've seen anything like this since like staying up late and watching Real Sex on HBO, like in the 90s. Like, I don't even think I was 10 years old yet. We used to be like watching something and then, oh, Real Sex is coming on, put the volume down. And they would use that and they would be out on the street, you know, having these different workshops, using peaches and things of that nature. Mm-hmm. So when I saw that on the website, I was like, oh, okay, like they're really out here doing workshops, like, you know, on real sex. Like, okay, cool.
It's intentional that we have a brown vulva, like she said, because oftentimes like people do sex education workshops and in front of a group of Black and brown people, and it's a pink thing. Not to say that people don't have pink vulvas, however, it's representation in this case matters.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I actually never thought about, like, I was like, oh, Darla is on the website. Like, that never clicked to me. Like, oh,
Darla and Mr. Woody.
I mean, we were in college with straight up, like, dildo models out on during tabling and, like, having people on the quad come up and try on condoms. So I feel like Darla is just an addition to the family.
So do you all, I know we talked before, you know, we kind of had our own conversation before we started talking about some of the upcoming conferences and stuff that you all are doing. Do you have like any relationships with colleges? I know you've gone to different states and as far as California, working with high schools and different organizations, but do you guys do like college tours? Because I was 17, I was a freshman at Howard at 17 years old. I couldn't get in the club. Like my life was real dry, but if the opportunity presented itself, I could have been, you know, involved, engaged in sexual activity. I wasn't, but the opportunity was there.
Uh-huh. Yeah, and I think, like I said before, like the beginning of our work was on our alma mater, which is Syracuse University. And we've been to Kutztown University in Pennsylvania. And we're expanding our list of colleges that we hope to work with in the future. But I think our college age people, as we call it, melanated millennials, are, I think, a group that we want to engage with a lot more because that is us in some ways.
Yeah. And if you didn't learn it in high school and you didn't learn it in middle school, you don't magically get to college and be like, know all the things. You just have all the opportunity to try all the things out.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we definitely are trying to expand our reach and our like working on what our college circuit could be like, because it's definitely one who we're used to talking to too. And it's necessary there too. Like, especially with the rates of like sexual assault and non-consensual sex happening in college. Like, you can't start with like, don't rape. It's like, actually, no one's ever talked to me about sex, period, before I got here. Okay. So definitely necessary.
No, that is definitely necessary. I mean, like, just like you said, you can't start with don't rape if you've never had a conversation about sex, period. And just thinking about different family dynamics a little bit amongst us here on the call, like, you know, I had a single parent household. Kim, you had both parents, and Brittany, you had different experiences as far as kinship before ending up with your mom. Like, you know, we never really know. I just remember thinking that as a classroom educator and learning the different lifestyles my students in my classroom live, if your mom can't read, she can't help you with your homework. So if nobody ever talks to you about sex in the home, I can't expect you to come to college and act right, especially when I know it's not happening in the school system. I will say this, though. I felt some type of way as a college student as far as what educational experience was like for me in New Jersey compared to other places. But I do think that my particular high school, we didn't just learn abstinence education. We had comprehensive sexual education in our health class. Mm-hmm. I think the educators tasked to do it were kind of uncomfortable because, like, normally you just do volleyball with us, and this semester you're teaching health. So, but I think that they genuinely tried to be as informative as they could be, and learning that even some healthcare professionals are not necessarily qualified to answer those questions. I commend them for putting their best foot forward, you know, under those circumstances.
Right. And I think, yes, like, sure, some schools may, you know, have to work within whatever resources that they have, but there are so many educated and qualified sex educators that are the ones that should be talking to young people about this. It should not be a math teacher who doesn't have any background or training in sex education teaching. Like you said, you had your volleyball teacher from last semester teaching you sex ed this semester. It doesn't flow right. And I think as we continue to progress, I hope that sex educators are the ones to do that, because they have the best people who have, you know, training in these different things are the ones that should be the ones having this conversation.
So how do you get trained in sexual education?
That's I'm sorry, I'm keep that laugh to myself. But I think it depends on like what your intention is behind your teaching, because sometimes people hear the word sexuality educator, they may think one particular thing. But I think for Brittany and I, we are sexual health educators in the fact that our educational backgrounds in public health, social work, human sexuality studies, women gender studies, psychology, all these different things inform the work that we do. And not to say that you need necessarily a degree in sex or something to teach audiences, but I think it's important for you to have a sex positive framework in what you're doing. It's important for you to make sure what you're saying is medically accurate, destigmatized, all these different things. And I'm not sure that you don't necessarily need an extra degree behind that, but you definitely need that framework and that perspective and that background if you're going to do it right.
And I know you all have background in social work. How were you able to tie that in, like as far as going from Syracuse and your grad experiences? What was that like? Like, did you know that you needed to be trained in sexual education? Like, I went to school for business, I went to grad school for education, and then I was like, this is not working. I want to be a guidance counselor. And they were like, no, actually, you got to go do this over here. These are things that I didn't know going into it. So, like, how did you did you just know? Was there a particular experience that led you to find out I need to be trained in this to transition from traditional social work to doing sexual education and reproductive justice? Because it sounds like a lot of research. Like,
yeah, I think it's different for everybody. So our trajectory is like Kim and I are I don't know what the proper term. We just like school too much. And so the social work, I think we had already started sex education before we started our social work studies. I think public health was the first study. So like that's our first okay, we have undergraduate degrees in like women and gender studies and psychology. And then we both went after a public health degree. And then like social work like came on top of that. And so I think it was the need of like being able to better understand or explain something. So like in my case, I was really interested in how people move through the world with gender, race, class, et cetera, and how that impacted their health. And so then I went into public health, which really deals with like population health, prevention strategies, education, et cetera. But it doesn't necessarily offer like how you are in the real world with the individual. Because you're thinking about like demographics, pandemics, epidemics, like fighting the big fight, figuring out the best strategy that is based in research and really important. But when you come down to like the individual, the community that surrounds the individual, the needs of that person, the motivation that person needs to make a change about something, public health didn't have all of that for me. And I'm a macro social worker, so I still really think about like policy and like how the practices inform policy, but also always thinking about the individual. And so I think the further like social work helped me, at least on the clinician side, of like better explaining that the world is complete of individuals that make up a population of people, and that, in order to understand sexual health disparities, we have to understand people's sexual health networks. Mm-hmm. And we have to understand what people have individual access to, and we have to understand what the latest meme going around is saying about like the clean panty challenge, or we have to understand, we have to really dig deep in understanding what's on the meso level, the really small, micro, tiny level, before we understand big things. And so I think it wasn't like no one I was pre-med before all of this, and there's no like strategy chart on this is how you become a sex educator. You will not find it. It will not say study this, go to this training, read these 4 books, and then you're good. You literally build up what that looks like. And I would say even for Kim and I, like we're constantly creating our own professional development structure of like what we want to learn, how we want to learn it, what communities we want to learn from, where we want to be. Like we were just at an environmental justice conference, and how that interacts with reproductive health, and like how the products in your hair impact your ovaries. Like that's in nobody's curriculum. It's in KIMBRITIVE now, but so like really building out what it's really a self-structured, self-guided, and for us like justice and passion focused like road.
I really think that's so dope that you two found each other and have been able to build this, because trying to build something like for me by myself, trying to build out this whole community around daddy issues has been hard. Like finding what books to read, finding out what people care about, what problems need to be solved, and where to look for that. So it's just really interesting to see you all work together and just the things that you built. Like you said, there is new stuff coming out all the time, and you all have the information on what products in your hair affect your reproductive system, where that's not something I can just go to the library and find a book on.
Yeah, I think we have a really dope partnership. I would say. I think our friendship is what makes our business partnership so strong. Because Brittany is the only person in my life that can check me. Everyone else, bye. It's only Brittany that can do that. And I think she knows how to push me to be my best potential, whether it be outside of our business and in my personal life. So I think having that foundation is what makes our business just work, because people often think that we're one person based on how we like complete other sentences. It's because I feel like we have our passions for this work is very aligned. We're on the same page and we have a shared goal in mind. So yeah, I tried to brag about her a little bit.
Yeah, I feel the same way about you. I tell people all the time, like, what allows Kimbritive to be, don't cry, Brittany. What allows Kimbritive to be Kimbritive is that like part of the collaboration and like creativity is also from being vulnerable. I think it's also like we are like skilled at this in ways, and we do this all the time, but there's a huge level of vulnerability around being two Black women that are unapologetically talking about sexuality and sexual health. Like with all the things that folks say about young Black women in terms of sex, like to be outwardly speaking about that, you are always taking a risk. And I think I think it's our friendship because we literally have to be vulnerable about everything. Like there's not a thing for real that Kim and I don't share with each other. And like, I think that if we are asking the universe to do the same with us, for young people to be vulnerable, for college students to tell us like what it is that they want to learn, how it is that they want to remain healthy, what relationships look like if I think we can't talk about healthy relationships if our business isn't a practice of that, if our friendship isn't a living, breathing document of what healthy friendship could be or healthy relationships could be, and how we could be vulnerable in the world. I think it's the only way that we could create. And I couldn't do that. I would never want to do this without Kim, ever.
Well, they say friendship goals. That is so dope. While you were talking, I was thinking about on your Instagram, you guys have these shirts, curls and condoms. And I was like, I wonder where that came from. Was that like a brainchild of one of you guys' conversations in the middle of the night or something?
Were you there? Because that's actually what happened.
No, but that's how things happen with me and my friends. Like they joke like, okay, that's your 3 a.m. brain. We need you to go to sleep now.
Right. I think if I look at the timeline of when we created that, I think at that time I was new in the natural world in some ways, like still experimenting and learning. And I was always going to Brittany for like natural hair things because I was new to this. And we was like, yo, what would it be like if we talked about like our sexual health and we talk about our hair? Because you could talk all day with your friends about what products to buy, what's on sale, what's this, what stylist is this. And I'm like, thinking about what we care about. I'm like, what would it be like if this is how people are passionate, energetic, talking about like their sexual health? And we were like, what can we call this thing? And it was really like a silence, curls and condoms. Like, that's really what it was.
At the same time.
When I saw that, I was like, dang, that's like marketing genius. Because, not even knowing any of that backstory, I'm thinking this is how you branch out of just going to women's health types of conferences, and you can be at the Curl Fest and talking about what you guys do because you've made the connection now. And now knowing that you guys know what products do to your reproductive system, like there's a real purpose in that connection now.
Yeah. We got some things planning for curls and condoms. So you'll be one of the first to know when we figure out that piece. Yeah.
Well, I've asked all of the questions that I had on my list and even a few more that came to mind throughout the conversation. If you don't mind, I'll unmute the guest and see if anyone else has a question. Sure. And then if you guys have any questions, just let me know. So I'm unmuting everyone that is calling in from their cell phone. So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and say your name and what your question is. And I'm going to give y'all a second because I know when I'm on these calls and the person unmute me, then I got to unmute my phone and get a little tricky. So I'll give y'all a minute. I know someone texted me like, oh my gosh, that's the question I wanted to know. I was like, all right, well, if you want to know something else, just let me know. And if there are no questions, we can continue on with the evening.
Yeah, I think if people have more questions they want to ask us, feel free to email us at KIMBRITIVE@gmail.com. And that's KIMBRITIVE@gmail.com.
Someone gonna talk?
Hello?
Hi.
Hello? Hello? Can y'all hear me?
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you.
Okay. So one of the things that I
Your
found
name.
was when you mentioned how you'll have like a gym teacher or like somebody that's teaching some like random class in school that like takes these subjects on for the kids. Like, do you feel like somebody that isn't certified in the subject matter would be qualified to like run a workshop or teach a class, even if it's like a 2-day thing, or do you like strongly feel that it has to be someone that's certified in social work or certified in sexual education or something along those lines?
No, not at all. I think because in our own experiences, we were doing this work without any of the alphabets after our name. So I don't necessarily think that you need a degree, but I think, like, again, what's most important is the framework that you're using when you're an educator. Like, what messages are you saying to people? Is it factual? Is it destigmatized? Is it biased? Like, all these different things are important because we have enough of those type of messages out there, and we can affirm that those aren't ethical practices at all, or appropriate. So I think having those appropriate, like, sex positive background frameworks, all these different things, and what you're educating people on is most important. And of course, doing the research. That's how you're able to develop any type of content. If it has to be grounded in accuracy.
Yeah. So the other thing I'm curious about is like boundaries, because you were saying how they were the one place that y'all went to, they told you, okay, you can talk about this, but you can only talk about the bad things, and you can't pass anything out, which on one side, I can understand why that's like frustrating. But from like a parental side, like sometimes people want to teach that themselves. Like, where do you feel like that line is between what you can say freely to, especially like school-aged kids, and where you should be like, okay, well, you know what, this might be a topic that you might want to kind of sit down with your parents or guardian?
Well, there's sexualities, like education standards that are out there that sort of speak to what you're supposed to, what is best for you to learn at certain ages. So from K through 12, and I can send it to Shamika for her to send to everyone if they want access to what those look like. But there's sexuality education should happen from pre-K even, and that doesn't have to be about, what I envision is like sex ed. It can be good touch, bad touch, all these different things to start at a young age and go throughout their, their education, their school age years. And I do hear the point about, your parent might want to be the one to have that conversation, and that's fair. I think we respect parents' perspective and them want to be the ones to have that conversation. But what we're saying is that if we're going into a space to do a workshop, these are our guiding values and principles in the work that we do. So we won't be able to facilitate an abstinence-only workshop because that's not something that we hold as the appropriate way to have a discussion about sexual health education.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for asking your question. I think the first one definitely resonated with me because I was thinking about it. How were you able to host these workshops without the credentials or the letters behind your name, so to speak?
I mean, there's already a pattern for that. A lot of people that are hosting workshops don't have credentials or, things behind their name. And because there is no credentialing for sex educators, there are things that make you more experienced in certain parts of it, but it's not like you have to have this thing. Some people in some schools in New York, they're like, you need to have a teacher certification to teach sex ed. The majority of sex educators are not teachers trained in education. We have different types of education. So that is a very fault. It doesn't serve sexuality educators because that means a gym teacher that is trained in, you know, that can teach sex ed, but a person who's trained in sexuality education can't teach sex ed in a school. And so it was easy. I think it's easier for us to navigate that. I think what you do have to prove is that you've done it. Like, I know there's so many people that want to specifically teach young girls or young girls or young women about their bodies and about all of these things. And it's usually coming from a place of like, this is what I personally do, or this is what I personally know. I'm different now at 27 than I was at 16. And so like really pushing people to look at the national sex ed standards of like, this is actually all you're supposed to know in 6th grade. This is all you're supposed to know in 7th grade. This is all you're supposed to know in 8th grade, is where I never discourage someone from wanting to have these conversations. In fact, like, we're not able to go across the country everywhere to do these. So like, consulting, like if you want to learn how to do a workshop in your community or on your classroom, like you can hire us for that too. Like we're trying to build a force of like as many folks that can disseminate information, but we just want to make sure that you lead off right. And sometimes that can be as simple as knowing the standards, knowing about boundaries. So like, you know, how much is too much to share? Like how much of your personal story is too much to share?
Right.
What happens when you open up that can in the classroom? Being LGBTQ capital, like not teaching cisgender sexuality education, even if you assume that everyone in the classroom is a cisgender, you know, person, like you don't teach it. It's not fair. You shouldn't teach it that way. And so there's like a few things that people can do that we would like in our ideal world for people to do. I don't think there's any measuring body to be like, oh, you can't be a sex educator. But there's some levels to this.
When you said that just now, as far as cisgender sexual education, I thought about the show The Fosters. You watch The Fosters? And I remember they had an episode where some of the children in the LGBT community were curious, and they were like, this sex ed don't service me. And the teacher was like, well, do what you can. So they wanted to have like their own class. And somebody got fired for helping facilitate that. Like one of the parents was also an administrator there and held the class, just off the strength. But a different administrator was like, I can't let you do that, without permission slips. And because they got permission slips, it made the school liable. So they got fired. It was just too much. But
oh, wow.
And I mean, that's what like I struggle with too, of like, when we talk about like lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans youth as if they're like a subsection in a curriculum that needs a permission slip. Like these young folks been attending your school since day one. Like I'm queer, I've been going to school my entire life. Like I don't want you to have to give my classmates a permission slip to learn about me. Like, would you, if I went to a predominantly white school, would you want to give your kids a permission slip to learn about me being Black? Like on Black History Month, we handing out permission slips so we can learn about the other Black students' lives. Like, you don't do that. Like, and so I think that we shouldn't, not to compare and say like the struggle is the same, but like I think that people are like, oh, there's this no evidence behind this assumption that teaching young people about LGBTQ folks turn anybody gay or lesbian or, in fact, like in New York City, there's so many questioning young people. I think it's like 65% of students in New York City are questioning their sexuality. And so that's not up to, I don't think that if you held a special workshop that you should be fired on like that's actually like, it makes me, I'm angry. Like that's ridiculous.
It was just a TV show. It was just a TV show. I'm not saying it doesn't happen in real life, but that was just a TV show.
Yeah, but it's unconstitutional either way. Like you can't do that. Yeah, I watched The Fosters. I didn't watch that episode.
You probably would have threw your TV out the window.
Well, it's been lovely talking to you all. I'm pretty sure I'm a talker, so I could go for days. But I'm respectful of your time. I thank you both for staying past the 40 minutes that I proposed. And if you have any final comments you'd like to make at this time, I'm here for them. If not, it's been great, and I hope we can collaborate again in the future.
Of course. Thanks for having us. This was dope.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Like somebody was like, "So what are you talking about on Mondays with Ms. Reid tonight?" I was like, "Sex." They were like, "Okay." Like, no, like the people I'm talking to, that's their business. They talk about sex, and they were like, "So you just gonna talk about sex?" I was like, "You wouldn't understand, so just join." And they were like, "Okay, send me the details." And they came on for a little while, so I'll ask them later, like what they thought. But they was like, "So what are you gonna ask them about sex? You gonna tell them the story you told me the other day?" No, not.
I mean, you have the 2.0 adult version of this. I don't know, that doesn't be about young people.
Ms. Reid After Dark. Catch us later.
I mean, there's lots of stories.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of stories to be told, but it really was a pleasure vibing with you all and learning so much. I love to learn. Like, if anybody knows anything about me, I love to learn. So, like, this was amazing because I was really sitting here like, wait, what? Hey, it was a lot more than I expected, and I appreciate you all for being on the call tonight.
Thank you
so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye, guys.
Bye.